Welcome back to Tools and Track, and an update on my imported clothes horse. Let's build an engine. So it's a new day and a new development. Observant amongst us will note the head is gone. That has went to the same place that has done the block, and they're going to work their magic. So I took a couple of valves up, one inlet, one exhaust, just to sort of demonstrate what I thought was my fear about, you know, the play between the valve stems and the valves. It's fine. I'm being hypercritical. They're going to obviously do a double check on one of them just to make sure, but I think we're going to get away without having to re-stem it. They're going to get it pressure tested. If it's a wee bit of a warp on it, they're going to give it a skim, and hopefully that's all the head will need, and then we can look to get it built back. Our bench is starting to get clearer. However, there's always room for more crap to arrive. I say crap, this might be one of the most expensive episodes I've ever filmed, because after spunking $1,000 in pistons, we can go no further until all of this stuff's plugged in. It has been many weeks. We have covered this up to stop the dust causing a problem, and I've not even looked at this, but the rings are gapped, so today we need to get some progress on this. And I'll be honest, the progress is probably going to be, I want a short block built. Now it's the Christmas holidays, got loads of time, so I'm going to take my time and just start assembling things. So, how do you build a short block? And what is a short block? Well, quite simply put, a short block is the block. So everything that the block needs to be a fully assembled unit. Therefore, crank, pistons, rods, all of that stuff. So if you're on eBay and you go, oh look, there's an engine for sale, it says it's a short block, it's not going to include the cylinder head up or any of the other ancillaries. It is just everything that fits to the block to make it a rotating assembly. So that's a nice target. That can do as in an episode. What else do we need to make a short block? Well, the obvious answer would be rods. Welcome to a man called Brian Crower. These are entry-level uprated rods. So these are what's called Brian Crower Clubman series rods. So having a look, you can see they've got the I-beam design. They are obviously lovely, and they have to be, because you want lovely looking things sealed in an engine never to be seen again. Now I know everyone's thinking, but surely if you were, building an engine, you'd want to go for the most oversized and overspec rods you could find. Well, no, not entirely. Each one of these rods is rated for somewhere close to 200 horsepower. That's 200 horsepower each. We've got 6 of them, so that's well over 1,000 horsepower, and I'm looking for a ballpark 500 tops with a safe margin. That's a safe margin. So these will absolutely do the trick for what we're looking for. But rods isn't the end of the story. We also need bearings. So these are the main bearings made by ACL. These are everything that we need to get the crank in and moving. We probably could have used the old shells, to be quite honest, but with these being uprated, it was a no-brainer. They're out, get them changed. So these are standard size. We've not done an overgrind on the crank, so if you're ever looking for bearings, you can get thicker ones that will accommodate a grind that you take off the crank should you have damage on it. But our crank's fine. It was only the actual bores that needed issues dealt with, so standard bearing shells will be okay. But that's not the end of bearing shells, because the big ends need bearing shells as well. What's the big ends? These. This part of the rod also needs to be shelled as well. These guys are bushed, believe it or not, so the pistons come with kits to deal with that. So that's your small end, big end, main bearing. As well as putting them in, we're going to need these. These are ARP main bolts. Now, you'll see that the rod's ends have their own bolts, so we don't need to worry about that. But bolting the main caps to hold the crank in, we need something as well. I think, although don't quote me if I'm wrong, that the original bolts are stretch bolts, so we couldn't reuse those anyway. So I'm quite happy using studs, which are obviously uprated. We can maybe get into that later as to why. So that's, I think, everything we need to put a crank in with pistons and have it spinning without any issues. So, let's do that. You'll notice that this thing is still in the wee trolley and not on the bench. If I'm doing dirty grindy work in here, I don't want my nice clean engine to remain here. So I'll push it out into the other workshop. Similarly, if I'm doing work out there, I can push it in here and I can cover it up. Just keeps the dirt at a minimum. First things first, we're putting the crank in. And one of the first things that I need to do is got nothing to do with the crank. It's actually putting the oil squirters in. Now, when this block got machined and repaired, it had to be completely bare. That is, every little component had to be removed. So all they do is they take from the oil galleries that sit just under where the crank lives, and they point oil up, and that oil gets injected to the bottom of the piston crown. This helps it cool it and helps provide a bit more lubrication going up and down the bores, but it's mostly for cooling. record. Next we need to take out the old shells and get ready for the crank to go in. You do not need to go in here with any form of tool to get these guys out. Simply push from the bottom and remove. You've got a tab here, which is the locating tab. Push from the other side and lift the guy out. The bearings are definitely not hard to work out. Having a look in the pack, you have two sets. That's clearly going to be the top and the bottom. How do I know that? Because the bottoms, the ones that we just took out, have grooves in them for the oil feed. The tops do not. So this is the pack I want to work with first. Let's put shiny new bits in. So interesting point to note, I've just lined these up rather than press them in, just to make sure I've got them right. That gave me the fear. I was like, wait a minute, these are all different. How come I've not got one for the end? Well, I did, because by the time I got to the end, that one became quite evident. It is also the only one that's as thick as that. So that's why it's marked differently. The back face clearly has a bigger bearing than the rest of them. But what about the front face? Surely that would also need one. No, we've got a groove here. So that is not the case in this instance. So I'm happy enough with that. Can knock them home and move on to dropping in a crank. Right, let's crank it up. Oh, sorry. Right, I've cleaned all this crank up and it's ready to go in, but before we install it, there's a couple of things I need to talk about. First up, it is heavy as f***. I mean, I've not got scales, but I'd imagine it's somewhere close to the 40 kilo mark. There's just straight six cranks are massive things. Before we put it in, we need to make sure that the landing area for it is well lubricated. Now we're not just going to use engine oil for this, because when we get to the bit where the first start happens, you can imagine this block is completely dry. So all the oil would need to come up through here, circulate through all the galleries, hit these, hit through here, fully lubricate this and pressurise it so that it's a good seal of lube. Now when you do a first start, obviously you crank it and crank it and crank it before it goes, but there's still going to be a good few seconds where that's going to be, well, let's be honest, dry. That rotational force will disperse most of the oil, and there's a risk of metal on metal contact, and you don't want that. So we need to put something in there that's going to be a bit more lubey, and it's going to stick around a little longer than normal oil would. And for that, you need an engine assembly lube. This is, I don't know, recommended. I've got no affiliation with this whatsoever, but I've seen it used before. You've seen it actually next door as well when we're doing turbo stuff. This is pretty sticky stuff. It'll take a good few rotations before it properly disperses. It's safe to use in an engine so that when it goes into the sump, obviously we'll have a break-in period and change oil again, but it's not going to cause any problems mixed with oil. So what we need to do with this is get a good smear of this, land the crank in it, get the crank with a good smear, and then put the top caps on. That was good, but it's not right. Now we're going to look at the ARP stuff. So, in the box you've got the warranty nonsense, which I'm not going to bother with. What I'm looking for is some form of instructions. Hell of a lot of packing. Fastener assembly loop, we'll keep that because that's probably going to be the correct stuff to use. ARP nuts, ARP washers, and the ARP fasteners. Now looking at the fastener, it's got a hex drive on one end and a non-hex drive on the other, so hex drive to the top obviously. Please refer to the enclosed installation instructions for... Right, okay, well, where are they? Apologies, I thought that was just the warranty cert. This is also the instructions. Screw the studs, hand tight only. Alright, so we don't have a torque set for putting the studs in at the head, we just need to give them a nip. The fasteners, however, must be torqued prior to the Loctite setting up. So don't just put Loctite in, handball them, and then come back 3 days later to nip them up. Daddy, does this make me a real engine builder? And obviously I've put it on squint, because you're in too much of a rush to build good engines. Is this ready to come off yet? I hope your rods are better than your stickers. Notice how I've left the middle two out? That's because we still need to deal with thrust washers. So that's what a thrust washer looks like. That's the outside and that's the inside. As you can see, the outside has a couple of little oil channels there and the inside does not. So there's also a tab at the top that locates onto the main bearing cap. These sit down in there. Now, why do we need a thrust washer? Well, we don't even need the whiteboard for this one because I can actually demonstrate it with the crank without the washers in. Obviously the main bearings, they will deal with the up and down motion of the crank spinning, i.e. the pistons and rods banging up and down. That's why they're very important, that's why they tend to wear. Thrust bearings don't. However, they do have a part to play because the crank, if you look here, can actually move from side to side. So, see that? That's what's called end float, or lateral movement of the crank. Now that's an essential thing. There's got to be a clearance between that to allow it to rotate. If it's too tight, it'll bind up. If it's too slack, it'll slap about and wear out. So that is dealt with by the thrust washers, and as you can see, they are also oil fed. So when the oil comes down round the side of the main bearing caps, it'll also lubricate this. So as a result, you need to be kind of careful and edgy on what way you put these in. That has to face the outside towards the crank, not the inside towards the bearing as you may have initially thought. The plus side is, it's actually really easy to fit these, especially when the crank's in. You just drop them in like that and then feed them round. Toyota have been pretty canning with how to do that, and as you can see, there's a divot there and a point there, so they can only go in one way as well. Okay, now we've got all of that assembled, we need to plastic gauge, which means putting the shells in the caps and checking to see that the gap here is correct. Now let's discuss plastic gauge. You get one of these, which is the gauge, then you get a pack of this, which is plastic, basically. And what you do with this, you trim a wee length of that, and that's obviously a fine measured, like, diameter of plasticky goop, and you put that on the bearing surface. Tighten the bearing cap down and it expands. Of course, it'll only expand so much depending on the gap it has available. That allows you to measure the gap. Simple. I won't lie, that did pucker my bum hole a wee bit for we are off the scale on loose on these. So 0.018 is the thick stuff, all the way down to 0.045, which, if you think about it, the smaller it gets, the less it's been compressed, therefore the slacker the bearing is. So we're actually beyond 0.45. And I was like, oh, it's probably about 0.05 maybe. I had a look at the tolerances, 0.05 to 0.06. It's fine. So as long as I am just shy of that on all of these, we're Gucci. I hate saying Gucci. Why do I keep saying Gucci? We're good, right? So, lather, rinse, repeat for every single main cap. Bear with me. Now we're at the halfway mark here, and I've got the halfway shell, the one that has the thrust bearing slot in it. Now, I've just checked that it's plastic aged fine, they've all plastic aged fine actually, but you've probably noticed that I'm also loose assembling these ready for their final torque sequence, i.e. putting them in with a proper amount of the old sticky lube, and getting the ARP bolts ready to nip up. So I'm going to put these in, but I'm also going to put in the top shells for the thrust washers, which sit in a little bit like that. In fact, you can't really get them wrong. And I'm going to have them ready to tighten up as well, mainly because I just don't want to forget them. Now, after all that, comes the real moment of pending fear. Will this spin? Oh, that feels so nice. Just the slightest moment, and then it's perfectly smooth. That is exactly what we're looking for. So, what's next? Putting the gudgeon pin in, it's going to be fun. What I've managed to do is establish one in on all the pistons, and that will allow me to get the gudgeon pin in, locate it up against it, and then get the con rod in. That's fine. The problem is, how do you then get the next one in? Because I'm having to use the excess space to drive this thing in at 45 degrees and then click it, which I now don't have. I'll stick this in the vise and get creative. I got it in. It was horrific, but I got it in. I'm going to try again with another piston, and this time film it, because what I haven't filmed is that ring launching into the dusty corner and me having to fish it out. Thank Christ I found it. So that kind of working out a technique. These are the hardest rings I've ever had to try and put into a hole before. That's what she said. This is how we do it. Well, this is how I do it. I'm sure there's a tool for this somewhere, but bugger me if I don't know what it is. Start with one piston, like I say. Managed to get this ring in okay, because there's loads of space. Nip it up very gently in the vise. Coat our areas in strawberry jam. Take one rod, here rod, slip that into its position. Just offer this pin in. Slide it all the way through, maybe like so. And it will seat home against the other rotating ring. If there was an actual section of this you could grip on, this would be alright, but there isn't, so seat one end in the groove, like that. And then it's just a case of feeding it in, taking care not to scratch the piston. Easier said than done. There we go. And last of all, click, ping. Perfect. 2 down, 4 to go. Will my fingers survive? Place bets now. Backlash. Remember we were talking about that? I'm just about ready to chuck in some pistons. I thought let's just have a quick check on this. What you want to do, let's get a dial indicator. Probably should set that to 0. Set to 0, and then you want to get something that you can gently pry the crank with, obviously not going tonto. So I'm going to go between this and here, and then just pulling up. Oh, that seems like quite a lot. But what does the book say it should be? And that measurement is 0.020 on the small end to 0.220 on the top end. So we're 0.1, which is fine. So, pistons into the block. Only one thing we really need to remember here. Well, two. First up, take that off, otherwise it won't go by the crank. But the other thing is orientation. This can go in one of two ways. Now you'll see here that we actually have two larger divots in the bottom than on the top. Larger ones are for the exhaust. The exhaust, as we know on this engine, is on that side. Intake on this side. Big gaps to that side, small gaps to this side. So, we need to go and find a piston ring compressor. This is a piston ring compressor, and it does exactly what it says on the tin. Put the piston in the middle, tighten this up, and the little ratchet keeps it locked. And it compresses all of the piston ring until it's nice and tight, and allows you to chap it into the block of the block. Probably seen these before. Let's see if this one's going to work. Now obviously, A, we would be lubing these piston rings anyway so they don't scratch the bore, but B, you definitely want to lube them so you can chap them out of this compressor and make sure they slide in with a little to no drama. So, plenty of lube. I had a feeling this might be the case. Now I've got the main bearing caps on, loosely just nipped, which allows me to sort of spread around the lubrication and make sure all things are nice and spinny, and they are nice and spinny and free. However, I've now went to torque them. Now the main caps do actually have a bit of a specific torque procedure. Both sides of one rod must be torqued to 10 foot-pounds, and then from there you stretch the bolt to 45 foot-pounds. Now 45 foot-pound is easy enough because I've got that on my big 3/8 ratchet. However, the torque wrench doesn't go down to 10 foot-pound. So I'm kind of inclined to go on the good side on this, make sure I do this right. So I've ordered a smaller one. Unfortunately, that's not here right now, and it's Christmas, there's Royal Mail strikes. I don't know when that's going to turn up. But as it happens, I've also ordered a lot more things for this block to get it built up and ready for the sump to go on, because as I've probably not explained, but we will have seen in the strip down, I can't just put the sump on because there are other things on the front and the back of the block that need to be in place before the sump can go on. These 1Js are pretty complicated. So as a result, oil pump still to come, rear crank seal still to come, all of the gaskets are still to come. I got caught out a wee bit with that because I was like, well, you know, I can just get them, and then, oh wait, no, I still can't even put on something as simple as the oil pickup without having the correct O-ring for it. So we're humped, but we're not really, because you can't rush building an engine, especially a Ford's one that's going to be capable of what this one is. So I'm happy to put a pin in this and wrap up here. The next time we touch a Supra, obviously we're going to get the bottom end done, and hopefully I'll have the head back. We can start looking at that as well. Like I say, we're going to take our time, and we're going to build a good engine. I'm trying to show you as much as I possibly can without getting too A, laborious, and making it completely and utterly boring, and B, skipping things that you might actually find quite useful. If you just found this, obviously we're building an engine, it's quite an interesting thing. Do hit the like, subscribe, bell and all that jazz, because there will be more coming, and it really would help me out a lot. If you'd like to help me out a bit more than that, patreon.com/toolsandtrack. Help a brother out. And until the next time, guys, drive safe. Ah, come on now, father. It's time for a nap. I love my brick.